I have long been a proponent of a two-state solution, but I have long argued that it was no longer a viable alternative because I thought the Israelis were not interested after Camp David in 2000 in a two-state solution. But now, I think after what's happened, it's almost impossible to conceive of Israel creating a Palestinian state that is right next door to Israel.
Would you say that it's also impossible to conceive, having witnessed the events of October 7th, of a Palestinian state sitting peacefully side by side with an Israeli state?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think given what's happened on October 7th, relations between the Palestinians and the Israelis, we're talking about both sides here, that's what you're getting, have been poisoned to the point where a two-state solution is no longer viable.
So what should our goal be, Professor? We're here to try to work out what the world should be doing in that region. If the two-state solution you've supported for so long you no longer think is realistic or viable, what's the plan? What should we be trying to do there?
I have no solution. I think what you're going to end up with is more of the same, which is a greater Israel that is an apartheid state.
So rather than it being specifically a critique of Israel's overreaction, it's more a sense that there is no solution here. What we're witnessing is something that is just going to carry on.
These are two separate issues here. The Substack piece that you started with, piece that focuses just on Israel's policy in Gaza and is a critique of its behavior on moral grounds. And the question of what happens with regard to relations between Israeli Jews and Palestinians is another matter. And on that front, I don't see any viable solution, because in theory, there is only one viable solution, which is to give the Palestinians a state of their own. This crisis or this conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians can only be solved politically. It can't be solved with military force. And the political solution, theoretically, that works, the only political solution that works, theoretically, is a two-state solution. But as you and I discussed a few minutes ago, that train has left the station. So we're going to continue the status quo, which is a greater Israel that is an apartheid state. And I know it's controversial to refer to Israel as an apartheid state, but Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, B'Tselem, which is the leading human rights organization inside of Israel, all three of these organizations have produced major reports that make it clear that Israel is an apartheid state. And they, in fact, use that language. And by the way, I follow the Israeli press very closely, and it's commonplace for Israeli elites to refer to Israel as an apartheid state. So this is the future that we're dealing with. And it's not going to be pretty moving forward.
I guess I'm just surprised that phrases like apartheid state, which are so specific to the South African experience, in other scenarios, I could see you being critical of people sloppily applying phrases to other areas that don't correctly apply to them. And some of those organizations you listed are organizations that you might have been critical of in other scenarios. I'm surprised to hear how enthusiastically you embrace the rhetoric of Israel's critics in those terms.
Well, I don't like words like enthusiastically. I think you're sort of setting me up for the kill here. There's no reason that someone who is a realist like me can't also view the world in moral terms. And basically, one can argue, as most realists do, that when there is a clash between realist logic and moral logic, realist logic dominates. But there are all sorts of cases where the realist logic and the moral logic are lined up and they point in the same direction. And there are other cases where realist logic is not at play and you can make a moral case for doing something. And I want to emphasize that in the early 1990s, when the genocide took place in Rwanda, I fully supported American intervention for moral reasons. There was no realist logic at play in that case, and I thought from a moral point of view, the right thing to do was to intervene. So I think it's important to emphasize, because you're pushing me in the other direction, that realists can think about the world in moral terms. And there's nothing wrong with a realist like me assessing what's going on in Gaza from a moral perspective. And to take this just one step further, you're basically saying I can't talk about Gaza without also talking about what happened on October 7th, or talking about other cases like the Russian case. And I don't accept that logic. This is not to say you couldn't do a comparative study, but there's no reason that I can't put my lenses on my analytical lens on what's going on in Gaza and what the Israelis are doing. And there's no reason I can't assess it from a moral point of view.
Okay.